Okay, what's going on, everybody? This shows that I'm live here. So, today's video is not really going to be any type of self-help or self-improvement video. It's more going to be a bit of a rant and my opinion and views on the world and the current situations that have been going on, especially in the Western side of the world. Okay, but I really want to talk about a lot of history, a lot of human psychology concepts that are constantly repeating, and a lot of relating factors that we can see repeat in history that are happening today right in front of our eyes. And really, everybody is just sort of turning a blind eye to these things. Okay, so this might be a bit longer. It might be a bit of a rant. It might be a bit longer here. And I'm probably gonna take my time with this. I'm not really in any rush. You know what I mean? Usually, like when I'm doing the self-help videos, I'm very pumped up and like talking very fast and trying to get everybody on the same page. But here, I wanna make sure people really understand the concepts. Okay? Okay, so within the time period that humans have been on this earth, human instinct and human psychology wise, there has constantly been a need for more power, more control, and there has always been this constant repetition in history of a very few or a very small percentage of a population primarily controlling and dictating the choices, decisions, and daily livelihood of the majority of a population. And what I more want to focus in and narrow in on is totalitarianism and totalitarian regimes and government styles. Okay, so for those of you who do not know about totalitarianism, it is basically when a select individual or group of people want full control over a population in terms of the monetary control, control of resources, control of media, narrative, so forth, whatever it may be. And pretty much whatever they say, usually the state, the people in control, whatever they say goes. There is nothing that can surpass what they say. That is the law, that is the rule, that is the defining factors. And there's been tons and tons of repetition through history of totalitarian regimes that have affected millions of people, leading to the deaths, destruction of millions and millions of lives, and having a rippling impact through history. But even though we know how, terrible this obviously is, this is a cycle in history that never stops repeating, right? Now, what I want to describe to everybody is the various tactics of these totalitarian regimes, governments, and leaders that is always the same across the board. Whether you're looking at Mussolini in Italy times, whether you're looking at Stalin in Soviet Russia, whether you're looking at Hitler in Germany, back in all this obviously back in the day, whether you're looking at the Kim's dynasty to this day in North Korea. All totalitarian regimes and government styles use the exact same tactics to have full control and ownership of the people that they are controlling and obviously taking over, right? And no matter what the totalitarian regime is, it always benefits that one group who is in control, while the rest of the parties who are being controlled are constantly just being farmed like animals and go through generations of pain and suffering. Okay, and the thing is, first I want to discuss the tactics of these totalitarian regimes, as we can really relate that to what's going on in the modern day in the Western side of the world. but we have to take it with a grain of salt because it's not as out in the open when you go to the history books and you read about what Hitler did with Germany, or you read about what the Kims do in North Korea, or you read about what Stalin did in Russia, where they openly killed millions and millions of people who were going against their image, their ideal viewpoint of life that they are putting into control, right? So at the end of the day, it always starts with an ideology that these totalitarian leaders and that these tyrants will instill into the population through various tactics, okay? So whether you're looking across the board, whether you're looking at examples of Stalin or Mussolini or Hitler, they knew that one thing they had to do at the very core to first get people on their side and believing in them was to promote mass fear and uncertainty in some way or fashion, right? Because when you have a group of people who are dependent on their government and you put an individual into an extreme state of psychosis through fear, uncertainty, or whatever it may be, this confused, lost, scared individual has a much higher probability of following suit with the herd, creating a larger herd mentality, where then that herd mentality can be molded into the ideology of the tyrant, of the totalitarian government, right? So what happens is, through this programming, which is done through various avenues, such as the education system, where you can see examples of Stalin in Russia rewrote the history books to only talk about and benefit his ideology, his regime, his viewpoints, and the people in Russia at that time and the next generations who were following suit, who are just being born into this, and were following suit with what they were told to do, never knew a history outside of what they were told by that. The same thing, for example, in the current day is going on with the Kims. In North Korea, there is no religion. The religion is around the Kim dynasty. They are the gods there. They have literally taken full control of information, full control of any outside sources of information and cut that off. And they created the history books. They printed out the education books into what they want to teach, what they want to have their people that they are controlling understand and learn. Okay? So the tactics of these totalitarian regimes and these various tyrants is the same. There's always examples of them rewriting the history books, right? There's always examples of them controlling the media narrative, as well as enforcing various narratives through the media, through actual government law and policy, right? So they control the education system, they control the media, big media, and they end up controlling the government. When you have a population that's in a mass fear state, whatever the catalyst of fear may be, and then you have their leaders who they are supposed to depend on, which are supposed to have their best interests in mind, right? Which are supposed to have their best interests in mind. All the people are 1,000 times more susceptible to follow suit with whatever information and stimuli is being fed to them. This is the creation of propaganda. Propaganda through media and education, as well as government law and policies, is not meant to make sense. It's not meant to follow any type of logical thinking or critical thinking deduction. It's only meant to support the ideology of the tyrant and totalitarian government. No matter how crazy it may be, this becomes normalized. The propaganda created by these totalitarian leaders becomes normalized and becomes what the people believe is truth, right? Because through history, what the majority of the 1%ers and the people who control the majority of the population have understood is that reality for every individual, a solid degree of reality for every individual is perception based. Your emotions, your viewpoint, your lens on life has a huge factor on how you perceive reality itself, right? So you can see the sky is blue, but if someone else can learn to convince you that everybody else thinks the sky is purple and you're the crazy one for thinking the sky is blue, eventually you will perceive reality as the sky is purple, because you're going to follow suit with the herd mentality due to being in a chaotic fear state and due to being a potential outsider of that social hierarchy at the time, of that community, of that country, of that population. Most people are extremely afraid of becoming an outsider or getting exiled or no longer having that support of their community, country, population, and people around them. This is another factor of how easy it is to influence people as individuals into a herd mentality. Okay? So, what do we see happen? We see that regardless if it was Hitler, regardless if it's the Kim dynasty in North Korea right now, regardless if it's China, regardless if it was Stalin back in the day, regardless if it's African warlords in their various African countries and how they control the narrative and dictate the media, rules, law, and everything else, what happens is these totalitarian leaders slowly remove the freedoms of their population, but convince them that they are removing the freedoms in their best interest for their safety and for their well-being. But the truth is, they are removing their freedoms so they can use that population to further fuel their ideology, their power, and extend their control for generations, right? So you saw that you've seen this happen in repeat in history, and you wonder when you look at North Korea, and if you really go and study the conditions of these people who are living in these totalitarian regimes and eras within those individual countries or whatever it was, it is absolutely inhumane. It is disgusting how a person, a human being, can be stripped of their willpower, can be stripped of their power of choice, can be stripped of their freedoms, and how they can be manipulated into thinking that if they want to have freedom, if they want to pursue love or personal interest or any type of personal gain, it is a mistake that can be punishable by death or some type of punishment. And you're only supposed to support the state. You're only supposed to follow your leaders. That's what you are only supposed to do. Right? So, we can easily deduct that when you look at any of these totalitarian regimes in history, it was very easy out in the open when you saw Stalin slaughtering millions of Russians or Ukrainians that went against his ideology, or Hitler slaughtering millions of Jews who are going against his ideology of a perfect society and what he saw as set to fit rule. You know what I mean? Whether you're looking at the Kims, where they literally are gods to all of their citizens within the country, well, they are eating like kings. Their country, the people, are going through the biggest famine, one of the largest famines ever seen, and starving to death. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter. These are all very easy to see and out in the open. Okay? But what do we understand and what can we take away from all of these totalitarian regimes that is the common denominators? Well, the people lose freedoms, rights, and liberties, right? The gap between the rich and the poor grows exponentially. The control of the government or the state gets larger and larger and larger in terms of what you can do, what you can wear, where you can work, what you can everything, what you can believe in, religious beliefs, everything, right? And then, sorry, 1 second, just got a message. And then we can also see that the people also get manipulated and fooled into thinking this is the norm, because the whole ideology through these totalitarian regimes is that if you can instill this into a generation, if you can instill the tyrants' ideology into a generation, then the next generations after that are not even going to know anything prior. You literally start to rewrite the history books. They would never know of a norm or a society before this totalitarian regime. They're going to be born into something thinking this is how the world is supposed to be. That, like, it's a great strategy, but it's absolutely fucked up. You know what I mean? The people who are born into these totalitarian regimes, the generations after, it's such terrible circumstance. They have no chance. You know what I mean? So, what have you noticed with this whole coronavirus? This virus that has a 99.9% survival rate. This virus that has a very similar severity to the regular flu. What have you noticed besides the virus itself? What path has this catalyst taken to the Western side of society and started to train them like cattle, started to train them like sheep, started to create a herd mentality? Let's go through it, okay? First of all, already understand that this conditioning and programming within the Western side of society did not just start with the pandemic, but the pandemic and the coronavirus accelerated it exponentially into like what is going to be happening in the near future in terms of control, dependency on the government and state, and overall power balances between the people and the government. It's going to be fucking disgusting in the future. It's going to be scary. These are scary times, okay? So this conditioning through mass media, through big pharma, through education has been going on for the last 50 years, last 20 years at an exponential rate with the explosion in technology, with the explosion of the internet, with the explosion of connectivity. What have we noticed in the Western side of the world even before the pandemic hit? The majority of people were already in an extremely mentally and physically vulnerable and easily manipulative state, very susceptible to manipulation, right? When you look at the statistics in the Western side of the world, before the pandemic, depression, other mental illnesses have been through the roof, going up in record numbers, suicides and all of that. Obesity is at record levels. The gap between the rich and poor is constantly getting larger and larger. The majority of people are trapped in financial debt and constantly looking for a way out from credit card debt, student loan debt, mortgages, whatever it may be, auto loan, piling up in debt as they also live paycheck to paycheck, constantly having their mind filled with these worries and stresses and fears at the same time in a very poor mental and physical state, right? This was already the norm. The rat race, the 9 to 5, people slaving away, that was already normalized for the last 50 plus years in the Western side of the world as people feed this capitalistic society and feed into consumerism, but deteriorate their mind and body through this process. Then the coronavirus comes to the scene. This new virus that instills mass panic and fear. People, they're talking about seniors being the most impacted. Your children can get it, how it's mass spreading, how easy it is to catch. And all of a sudden, people are in a mass fear state. When a person is in a mass fear state, confused, not understanding what's going on, where do they turn to first to look for guidance? Their leaders. The same leaders who are pumping the news networks 24/7 and having all these dangerous, scary headlines going off the news 24/7 in the newspapers, on every single news channel, on the internet, right? The same leaders who are growing the fear of this virus and telling people this is something you need to be scared of. The only way to get rid of this fear, the only way to go back to what the normal used to be, start listening to us. Everything we say, even if it doesn't make logical sense, even if the rules we may give you will not have any consistency, which I'll get into after, even if the science is not making sense, even if there's no logical reasoning or critical thinking behind it, don't worry. Just keep listening to us, keep abiding by our rules, and we will get through this and take you back to what normal used to be so you can feel safe again. Guess what? that normal is never fucking coming back. That normal is never coming back because what they did as this, and I'm not saying the coronavirus is fake, it doesn't exist, but its severity, its danger, how dangerous it is, has been absolutely blown out of proportion. And when you're looking at the survival rate, the amount of deaths in relation to the overall population, when you can compare more deaths related to obesity, to smoking cigarettes, to the diseases linked to alcoholism and being an alcoholic and drinking every day, to heart disease, to all these other diseases, AIDS, HIV, whatever it may be, right? But it's been so narrowed in constantly through all your stimuli, wherever you looked, when the coronavirus first hit, no matter where you looked, you could not avoid it. You were going to be getting scared at one angle or another, whether you went to go talk to your friends who just watched the news, whether you're talking to your family members who are older and even more scared, who are listening to their leader who's supposed to be guiding them, whether you're going onto social media, you're going onto your phone, it is subconsciously flooding your brain, putting you in a state of confusion, putting you into a state of fear, right? And then slowly, as you are in this mass state of fear, your leaders start to take away your freedoms and rights. But you don't notice this because first it's just about, hey, wear a mask everywhere you go. Guess what? Scientifically, if you look at every single country, you didn't have to wear a medical mask that actually protected you from any airborne or external viruses. You just had to wear a mask. You just had to cover your face. You could be wearing a cloth that you could blow right through. You could put a fucking piece of underwear, Fruit of Looms on your face. You could go in with your t-shirt. So what was the point of that? I would understand if scientifically you had to wear a certain type of mask that is proven to protect from these various contagions or bacteria, but that wasn't the case. You just had to wear a mask. You had to wear a face covering, right? You don't realize that you're already being forced to do something without logical reasoning behind it, but you do it because it's being forced to you from all these different angles, and it's being forced to you through media. All of your friends start doing it. Everybody else starts doing it. You don't want to be the sheep. You don't want to be the black sheep. You put it on too. I put it on too. Otherwise, I wouldn't get served in certain areas. Otherwise, I couldn't go to the gym. Otherwise, you could not live a normal life unless you complied. Really think about the psychological impacts. And I'm just at the start of the pandemic talking about masks. Then you get social distancing. Then you get social distancing, but in certain businesses and areas where mom and pop shops get closed down due to the virus spiking, why were the big corporate places still open? How come Walmart was booming? How come Costco or these other big box brand stores were booming? How come when certain businesses got shut down, a lot of the liquor stores in Canada stayed open? The liquor store in Canada, even through the height of the pandemic, through the most fear possible in the pandemic, the liquor store never closed. The liquor store did not close at all in Canada here, and especially in Ontario. You know why? Because the government knows if you close the liquor store, if you close off access to alcohol, there'd be more submissions into the hospital for people with alcohol withdrawals than there would be for COVID. You can't cut that off. You can't cut that money supply off. So how come when people lost their jobs, when these small businesses suffered, how come these pick and choose rules, even though there's this mass pandemic, shouldn't the rules be set across the board? Why were the liquor stores still open? Why was Costco running at full capacity without social distancing? You could have 1,000 people in there. Why was Walmart elbow to elbow, but as soon as I go somewhere else, I have to be 6 feet away from somebody? Where was the consistency? Where was the logic? Where was the critical thinking and how come nothing made sense? Remember, when a totalitarian regime, when a tyrant puts you in mass fear and they're promoting their ideology on you, it's not supposed to make sense. Because if they were promoting their ideology on you of wanting full control over you, of wanting full observation of your whole life, dictating what you do in your life and what you don't do, you wouldn't like that. So they have to package it up a little better. They have to rewrite their words a little better. First, it starts with the masks. Then it starts with the social distancing. Then it goes with the lockdowns. Lockdowns, where was the consistency with that? How come in Canada, just as populated the other side of Canada, lockdowns compared to Ontario or compared to Quebec, how come they were all so different? How come some countries in the whole world who had huge cases never went into lockdown at all? But some countries are still in lockdown to this day, where cases are still flat. When you're looking at the cases are flat, more and more people are vaccinated. What did lockdowns do to people psychologically? It stopped them from living their normal life. It put them into a bigger state of fear, and it also puts them into a state of solitude. One of the easiest ways to manipulate people is not just fear state. If you could also put them in an area of solitude for a consistent period of time, it is a proven method of reprogramming a person. Why do you think solitary confinement exists? These are tactics that have been used, studied on human psychology, of how do you manipulate people? How do you get people to believe in you? How do you change the perception of somebody else's reality? Through constant repetition, through constant programming, through constant flooding of stimuli, right? So now you have these people who have been forced to wear masks, social distance, but now they're also getting locked down. Right? Lockdowns came before the vaccines. Remember this. Please keep this in mind. The lockdown, all people wanted who were locked down was to go back to a normal life. They were getting more depressed. They were getting lazier. They were feeling more sad, suicidal. All people wanted was to go back to the norm, and they didn't even know that subconsciously, now they are more susceptible to do anything that their leader says to go back to that norm. Please get us out of lockdowns. Please, we'll do anything. Let's get out of these lockdowns. What is it? What do we need to do? Oh, you guys want to get out of lockdowns? Okay, we just came out with the vaccines. These vaccines that are going to generate hundreds of billions of dollars for these companies, big pharma, as well as the investors involved, the politicians, the lobbyists, the bureaucrats, hundreds of billions of dollars. You got to take these vaccines. Okay, fine. You know what? If the vaccine is supposed to protect me from COVID, if the vaccine prevents me from getting COVID, if I cannot transmit it to my friends and family, then the vaccine makes sense. Okay, fine. Because guess what? I'm not an anti-vaxxer. Because coronavirus exists. It is a real virus. But really study the scientific dangers of coronavirus compared to the regular flu. Look at the mortality rate. Look at the survival rate. Look at the amount of people who had it, who recovered. Look at those numbers. Look at the cases, the actual real case figures and how they've been dwindling. But anyways, so now to these people who are locked down, who are in solitude, who are scared, who are in a mass fear state, who will do anything to go back to the way it was. Your leaders presents a way to go back to the normal. Get vaccinated. Okay, no problem. I'll get vaccinated if it protects me. But what? We're going to need multiple shots? Okay. The vaccines came out in a span of 6 months, not fully tested. FDA and other global regulators emergency approved these vaccinations before even fully testing them for their side effects or whatever it may be. And billions of people got these vaccinations through emergency approval, and even told by our leaders now that you'll get the first shot, you'll get the second shot, a vaccine that's supposed to prevent and protect. You'll get the first shot, you'll get the second shot. Choose Moderna, choose AstraZeneca, choose all these companies that came out with this vaccine in a very short span of time and had production ready to go for billions of people, had their company metrics, fucking accounting, financing, everything, investors ready to go, came out rolling with these vaccines. Pfizer just made $20 billion in 1 quarter, about to make $130 billion in the year. Right? You take these vaccines, and then your leader says, oh, but by the way, this vaccine, you can still get COVID. This vaccine, if you get COVID, you can still transmit it to your friends and family. Wait, what? But people are so scared, so confused, they've been so manipulated by the ideology of the tyrants and these leaders that they don't even realize and remember the definition of a vaccine anymore. Now, this vaccine, all it does is if you get COVID, it will lessen the symptoms and potentially lessen the risk of death. But even without the vaccine, COVID had a 99.8% survival rate. So, what's going on here? Now they're talking about third booster shots. Now they're talking about COVID pills just being approved by the FDA. In the UK, they're talking about a COVID nasal spray. What's going on here? So people have already given up their freedom of choice. They've been forced to wear things without reasoning and logic. They've been forced into solitude in their home without reasoning and logic. They've been forced to inject themselves or potentially face losing your job or being exiled by your family or society or being looking like the outsider or potentially facing penalties, whether it be with all these various vaccine rules and mandates coming out. But it follows no logic. It follows no critical thinking. You get these 3 shots and you can still get COVID. You can still transmit COVID. So it seems like those shots were just to give up more of your rights, just to show how much more can this population give up. And remember, these were people that were in an extremely susceptible state mentally to manipulation, because they've just been they've been programmed into a state of dependency on the government and their leaders for a period of years, number of years, through generations already. Then the pandemic hits, you have this mass fear, confusion, chaos. Then they start to get their rights and freedoms slowly taken away. Then you get put into solitude and put into this corner where you feel like you have no choice. You know, there was surveys done that the majority of people who got the vaccine, they did not get it for their protection of COVID. They actually got it to go back to a normal life, to go back and be able to work again, to go back to the gym, to go back to their normal daily social routines that they are so hoping to go back to. That doesn't make logical scientific sense. You should take a vaccine to protect you from something. That means that people themselves were not even scared of COVID to that degree. The majority of people were getting the vaccine so they can go back to restaurants, so they can go back to work, so they can go to the gym again, so they can go back to their daily life. And remember what I told you about totalitarian regimes. They create the fear catalyst, whether it be with the Kims, whether it be with Stalin, whether it be with Hitler. They create the problems, and then they also bring solutions to you where those solutions are actual like how can I describe it? They create the problems, they create the solutions, but those solutions are taking away your freedoms bit by bit as it fuels their ideology and their full control ideology of having total control. Okay? So, from a financial aspect, what else did the pandemic do? The pandemic also widened the gap between the ultra rich and the poor, between the politicians, leaders, bureaucrats, lobbyists, central bankers, doesn't matter. The gap between them and the working class and the middle class got bigger because this crisis financially also created an opportunity, just like we see every 10 to 15 years. This pandemic was a totalitarian tyrant's fucking dream. If I was a tyrant, this pandemic would be a dream if I could set that up. Even though it's fucked up, I would never do that. It was a dream. You get the economic benefits, you get the financial benefits, you get the benefits of the social, political control over your people. Your people are doing everything you're saying without even thinking about logic, science, reasoning, critical thinking anymore. This is a tyrant's dream. A tyrant's dreamland. For the tyrant and the people with him, that small 1% population, they're loving it. They're feeding off this. Their power, their control through the generations is growing stronger and stronger. Right? So when we saw that the pandemic and the lockdowns led to global stock markets crashing, led to massive printing of dollars by the central banks, mainly talking about the Federal Reserve, where 40% of all US dollars in history were printed last year. What this does is lead to massive inflation, but those central bankers that run the world, they take that money, and after the stock market crashes and the little guys get fucked, after these commodity and asset price crashes, like when oil crashed, and the little guys get fucked and these other people get weeded out, then they come in as the heroes, working with their government, saying, wait a second, we're here to support you. Here, take this stimulus check. Another trick. The stimulus check is the first steps into going into a universal basic income and a socialist type of regime in that style. A totalitarianism still, but a socialist style of regime there too, right? Where you become fully dependent on the state for your income as well. Okay? But the people, the scared, confused, lost people don't realize that they didn't essentially need the stimulus because the lockdowns were overblown out of proportion and they lost their jobs in businesses because of these leaders, right? They didn't realize that when they got those stimulus checks, the dollar value in their pocket dropped exponentially from a year prior because of the massive printing. They didn't realize that they're going to be dealing with monstrous inflation and an increase in cost of goods while they're also in this fear state, while they also lost their job, while they also had their small business destroyed. And what they also don't realize while they're in this massive state of fear and focused on all of their problems and doubts and uncertainties is that their leaders are benefiting and getting richer off of all this. Because those bureaucrats, those politicians, those central bankers, they're the ones who bought the stock market from the low. They're the ones who are buying oil from the low, these various assets, all these properties and houses, and making money grow exponentially. Did you not realize, if you look at the financials and economic side, that even though the globe is still in a pandemic crisis state, that the US 30 stock market index is almost, 20,000? US 30 stock market index is almost 40,000. It's at 36,000 right now. It hit today, I think, 36,000 plus. You know what I mean? It's thousands of points above the pre-pandemic level. Crash, pandemic state, stock market's here, pre-pandemic levels were here. Who's benefiting off that? You think it's your mom and dad? You think they're that heavily invested in the stock market? You think it's your granny and grandpa? You think it's the people in the working class and middle class benefiting off that? No. It's the ultra rich, it's the leaders, it's the big pharma, it's big food, it's big media, right? So this constant historical cycle and repetition, it does nothing but lead into a totalitarian state. It constantly benefits the ultra rich and the 1% who promote that totalitarian state. And all it does is enslave everybody below it and destroy their lives and kill millions of people and lead to the destruction of millions of people and generations after that. Now you can see big media fully controlled. In an age of information where we could all go learn anything we want, people are so distracted. People are such in a chaos and fear state, especially in the last year, that all they want to do is feel a little bit better and feel a little bit safer. So instead of educating themselves, instead of developing themselves, they focus on getting a short-term dopamine hit. You know what I mean? So they go distract themselves even more. Through those distractions, through those bad behavioral habits, they continue to feed the pockets of the 1% and the leaders who are absolutely milking the people, right? So think about when you're looking at any type of totalitarian regime in history, any type of dictatorship where full control is of the state. Even in fictional stories, go read George Orwell's 1984. Go look and study what Joseph Stalin did in Russia. Go study what Mussolini did in Italy. Go study what Hitler did in Germany. Go study what the Kims are doing in North Korea and look to see the common denominators that are actively happening in the Western side of the world in North America, right? The only thing is in North America, it's not fully out in the open yet because the people are being programmed into it, but the pandemic has already conditioned people into giving up their rights, giving up their freedoms, giving up their liberties, right? Has already conditioned people into listening to whatever your government says and your leaders say, even though it might not make any scientific or logical sense. Has already conditioned people to be in a mass confusion, fear, and chaotic state, has already financially widened the gap between the poor and the ultra rich even further, has already put more financial burden on those 99% of people to have even more dependency on the state. People are giving up more and more freedoms. All of this is a literal cut and paste template of how totalitarian leaders run it, right? So you have to understand, and people have to start to wake the fuck up, right? Nobody can, anytime I bring these arguments to the table, nobody can give me any reason. Nobody can give me any reason why people are getting vaccinated right now, even though the vaccine doesn't protect you from COVID and you can still transmit COVID. Because they're only getting vaccinated because their leaders are forcing them into that corner, and they're continuing to support big pharma, who has huge contracts with all these different countries. These vaccine companies have huge contracts with all these different countries. Like, you're talking about the European Union, Canada, like all the countries around the world, to supply billions of doses of vaccines, give second doses, third doses, pills, right? Where they benefit, the politicians benefit, the investors benefit, the ultra rich keep benefiting, and the people are taking it even though it doesn't protect you from COVID or stop you from transmitting COVID, right? Some countries are still in lockdown for no logical reason. Some people are still wearing cloths on their face that don't even protect you from anything for no logical reason, but this systematic programming is happening piece by piece by piece by piece. Next thing you know, it's going to be a snap of a finger, and you're not even going to realize how much control how much freedoms and control you have given up of your life. Right? So in the North American side of the world, Western side of the world, Europe, right? UK, parts of Europe as well, parts of the Middle East and Asia as well. You have to really wake up. We are all a part of this propaganda machine actively right now. All I want you to do is start to educate yourself, look into and understand the actual impacts of COVID, the dangers of COVID, the survival rate, the mortality rate, the recovery rate. Go look at those figures. Right? Look at the case figures. Look at the inconsistencies in lockdowns. Look at the inconsistencies in mandate rules. Look at the inconsistencies in all of the different rules that have been put on us that keep benefiting the rich but keep fucking our lives up. Right? So, we are clearly in scary times. It's clearly easy to duct that we're going onto a path of totalitarianism and giving up all of our freedoms and just becoming straight consumeristic pigs. Just like consumeristic pigs, fully dependent on the state, continuing to feed on the state, and thinking that this is how life is supposed to be, that this is normal, this is not right. You can feel it in your heart. If you just have to wake up and start educating yourself further. You know what I mean? So I really doubt there's ever going to be a modern revolution to this. I highly doubt there's going to be a modern revolution to this, just because people are so mentally and physically weak nowadays that they will never really fight back, especially as a collective. And for people to fight back as a collective, you would have to come together as the people first, because united we stand and divided we fall. So the issue with that is the people themselves have been put on these puppet strings where they're more worried about their gender and what 56 gender they are, or how they're feeling a little bit sad today, or worried about racial divides, or worried about religious divides, or worried about all these other distractions that constantly keep the people fighting and bickering amongst themselves, never truly finding solutions, never truly benefiting anybody or bringing any value to them or society around them, and just constantly a part of these distractions that is a part of the plan. When you have people that distracted, how are you supposed to come together for the common good to fight back the real enemy? Right? There's this common saying that they're talking about putting red ants into a jar, 50 red ants into a jar, and 50 black ants into a jar, right? And the human comes and shakes up the jar, right? And then when he puts the jar down, the red ants start attacking the black ants start attacking the red ants because they each thought they caused the issue. They were shaking the jar. Who was doing it? So this is a great example of society. Man versus woman, religion versus science, faith versus whatever, color versus this, white versus black, political party versus this political party. Everybody's focused on all that, but nobody's focusing on what's the hand that's shaking the jar. Do you understand? Okay? So the best thing that we can do during this doom and gloom era, because I've been very, I don't want to say like, I've been very self-aware, and I've always studied this type of stuff, not just like, not in school or stuff, just out of personal interest, because I'm always interested in just overall human psychology, how the brain works, right? It's an extremely interesting concept of this supercomputer we have in our head, and how you can make it to this absolutely amazing tool, or you can also program someone to be an absolute robot. It's so crazy, the spectrum of the human brain, you know what I mean? So I've always had an interest in this stuff, and I always knew that this was eventually going to happen, but I never thought it was going to happen in my lifetime. I was like, oh, this is something that's going to happen in the future. You know what I mean? 100 years from now, like this full control, constantly monitoring us through our phones, having all of our data, having all of our information, constantly farming us for our time, attention, resources. And I was like, nah, this is like this Matrix type of stuff. This is going to be way in the future. It's now. It's fucking happening at an exponential rate with the pandemic. You know what I mean? So the best advice I can give for everyone is, first, you cannot help anybody around you unless you help yourself. So first you have to learn to help yourself. Go out and fucking educate yourself. Go learn about history of these totalitarian regimes. Go learn about human psychology, how the brain works. Go study these various concepts. We are in an age of information where we have a supercomputer in our head and a supercomputer in our hands right here. And you don't have to go on TikTok or Netflix or Pornhub. Go to Google and go type in whatever you want to learn and start studying. Go into it. Go look up. Go take your time and do that. Don't rush it. Take your time. Go work out. Do some physical activity. Get yourself in better physical and mental shape, like a warrior, male or female. Become a fucking warrior for yourself first. Eat better. Eat better. Eat cleaner. Stop eating all this processed food and fucking junk. Care about how you fuel your body. At the end of the day, we are working machines who generate energy. We literally generate watts in heat, right? How you fuel yourself is extremely important. So go out, educate yourself, cut out bullshit, right? Put yourself in a better mental state, in a better physical state, and then you can help the people around you and influence the people around you. But it starts with yourself first. Okay? But anyways, everybody, that was a little bit of a rant. Fucking heart rate's going up. You know what I mean? Hopefully, you guys appreciate that little rant. Hopefully, it made sense when we're talking about some of that repetition in history, when we're talking about the tactics of totalitarian regimes, the common denominators, the timeline of the pandemic, the lack of consistency, logic, or reasoning behind all these freedoms we've given up and all these rules we've had to follow. You know what I mean? Yeah, I might not be a big influencer or anything like that or have a big following, but if I ever randomly die, it was not a suicide. You know what I mean? If they ever, you know what I mean? No, it's only like, I don't get that many views, but. Alright, so I'm going to save and upload this. This wasn't really a self-development video, Just more like, you know when I used to go on Instagram Live and just rant about central banks or rant about money or rant about governments and stuff? This was more like that. All right, everybody. Take care. Have a great weekend. Take care, guys.